All right, let's look at some definitions of some terms that are used in experimental design and experiments in general. So the first we have is what's called the explanatory variable. The explanatory variable is the independent variable in an experiment. It's typically plotted on the horizontal axis of a scatter plot or a time series plot. An example of the explanatory variable would be like the number of sprays of perfume and cologne from the previous example. The next is the response variable. This is a dependent variable in an experiment. This variable is measured for change at the end of an experiment. So an example of the response variable would be the number of coffee dates. So the independent variable would have been the number of sprays or spritzes of perfume and cologne, and then the resulting number of coffee dates would be the response variable. So in a randomized experiment, the researcher manipulates values of the explanatory variable and measures the resulting changes in the response variable, right? So if we changed, the number of spritzes, from maybe 1 to 2 to 3 and so on, then we look and see what the response was to those different treatments of perfume and cologne. Treatments, okay, those are the different values of the explanatory variable. So actually here, I actually got it wrong. It shouldn't be the number of coffee dates, right? Because number of coffee dates wasn't my explanatory variable. In which case, it would have been number of spritzes. So the treatment would have been number of spritzes of perfume or cologne. Okay, I got it right here. That should not be there. An experimental unit. So an experimental unit is kind of like a dispassionate way of saying a single object or an individual to be measured. So if you took a person and you spritzed them, with 3 spritzes of perfume or cologne, you wouldn't refer to them as I sprayed a person. You would say I sprayed an experimental unit. Okay, so it's an impersonal way of referring to the object of study. Okay, and the reason for that is to try and keep personal feelings out of experiments, out of experimental measurements. Okay, so that's why we use the term experimental unit. Next, we have a lurking variable. So a lurking variable is a variable that has an effect on the study even though it is neither an explanatory nor a response variable. So for example, let's say you didn't think about the type of perfume or cologne. Does it have a floral scent? Does it have a woodsy scent? Does it have a soapy or musky scent to it? Let's say you didn't think about that at all. You just, went to a perfume store, grabbed the first one off the shelf, and you went and used that in your experiment. Well, if you didn't think about, how that actually smells, that could actually affect the outcome of your experiment, right? That could affect the response variable. It could affect the number of coffee dates, because people may prefer more of a floral scent or a woodsy scent or a soapy scent. So you have to take those kinds of things into consideration. Let's see. Next, we've got random assignment. So organizing experimental units into treatment groups using random methods. Um, so when participation in a study prompts a physical response from a participant, it is difficult to isolate the effects of the explanatory variable. So to counter the power of suggestion, researchers use the following. So when they conduct an experiment, they'll have a control group. So a control group is a group that receives an inactive treatment, but is otherwise managed exactly as the other group. So an inactive treatment, um, you know, is what they refer to as a placebo. Now, I think probably the most common placebo, you could think of would be when testing a medicine where a patient takes a pill. Okay, so you'll have two groups of people. You'll have one group of people, which is your control group, and then you'll have another group of people. This is actually your experimental group. You'll give your control group a placebo, which is basically just a sugar pill. Okay, and you don't expect like a sugar pill is going to have really any effect at all. But then you give this experimental group actually a pill, which is a medicine, an experimental medicine pill. Now, superficially, the pills look identical on the outside. They're both white, they're both the same size. So, people in the control group don't know they're in the control group. People in the experimental group don't know they're in the experimental group. This is a way to counter the power of suggestion. Um, because the human brain actually can control some certain things in your body, and that part is still not fully understood. But if people believe that a sugar pill they're taking, if they believe that actually has medicine, that actually has a way of causing a positive response, you know? Um, so you try and take that factor out of it. Okay. So here I talked about a placebo. It's an inactive treatment that has no effect on the explanatory variable. Blinding is not telling the participant which treatment a subject is receiving, right? So, you have people in a control group, you have people in an experimental group. You don't tell them what group they're actually in, and you don't tell them which pill they're getting. Okay, that's called blinding. Now, double blinding is blinding both the subjects and the researchers, right? Because researchers themselves could be biased. They they could be prejudiced, right? Um, and it doesn't have to be prejudice, in the way that you think of like racial prejudice. It just could be um, something where a participant wears a certain perfume or cologne, and the researcher likes that smell. And subconsciously, because they like that smell, they put that person in the experimental group, you know, instead of being in the control group. So it can be things like that. Uh, you're trying to eliminate that. So, you separate, where the researchers don't even know what pill they're giving to each person. And so they don't even know if they're giving a person the sugar pill or the medical pill. Okay. So both the subjects and the researchers don't know who is who and what is what. Okay. That's double blinding. And this is actually, the type of thing that you want to do if you want to have confidence in the results that you're getting. Okay. So let's go ahead and stop here and we'll look at some examples of these terms.